I wound up giving the BBC today because at our daily stand-up meeting, I shared the daily news with everybody and what was happening today regarding the protests, and then on top of that, the riots, and on top of that, the lack of leadership. So I've been thinking about this all morning. Yeah. And there's so many different ways to see it, because we can look at the situation from the viewpoint of, politics and sociology and so on. And, there's a several marginalized communities in this country. And then, when they aren't treated fairly, then protest, and then you get the outside instigators, and then you get the police who, have their own problems. And, you have institutionalized racism. So we can go on and on and on about this, okay? But then the other way to look at it is through the eyes of Dharma. Yeah. And to look at our own mind and how we respond to these kinds of things. Because, we all come from different backgrounds. Our buttons get pushed. We have sympathies with different groups, and we understand different groups very well. And other groups we don't understand so well. And it's very easy to become depressed, disheartened, confused, what's happening to the country, it's all falling apart. Yeah. And then you're like, well, what does that mean for me if everything's all falling apart? And where do I find my place? And all I want is security. And, then we get into our own personal stuff and feelings of insecurity and impermanence and all that kind of stuff. And through all of this clutter, in one way it's clutter, in one way it's dead serious, okay? I was thinking about Venerable Sangye Kadro's BBC the other day, where she was talking about the dewdrop and impermanence, and about how if we tried to gather all of our dewdrops together and preserve them, it would really be rather silly. And making me think, just about how unstable our life situation is, and how much we crave for stability. Yeah, we crave for security. And it's very frightening to actually confront impermanence. And yet this was the first teaching the Buddha gave, and the last teaching the Buddha gave. And yet when we see impermanence, the first thing Sunday morning, where, American cities are in turmoil and there's riots and this and that. And then there's also peaceful protesters. And I don't know what the Prez is doing today, if he's out playing golf, but there's like no leadership. So it's very easy, to look at our samsaric situation and say it's so insecure, and go into this self-reflexive fear of what's happening in the country, everything's going down the tubes. That's scary. But also just looking at impermanence in general as the water that we swim in is also scary, because we want everything to be secure. So what am I trying to say here? I'm saying if we look deeply, our mind fights against reality. And the reality is change. Reality is there is no security in samsara. That's it. When that reality becomes present to us through the news or through somebody that we care about dying or some kind of big stress factor in our life because something we haven't wanted to change has changed, okay, then we so easily go into panic, depression, confusion, and so on, okay? So then the question comes, how do we stop being afraid of impermanence? Yeah, if this is the reality in which we live in, how do we stop being afraid of it? Because it's not going to change. There is one factor in life, reality wins. Okay? What we want, what we think should happen, the way we think things should be, doesn't count. Reality is that things change. Reality is that there's no inherently existent things. Yeah, there's no way to change that. It's us that have to adapt to reality in order to stop suffering. Because it's our refusal to adapt to reality, our insistence on it can't be this way because I don't want it to be this way, that creates so much suffering in our own hearts. Okay? So, what's lying behind all of that? Okay? What I see when I look deeply is, you come back to ignorance, and the I always wants to prove that it exists. This grasping at inherent existence wants to, it goes to any length possible to prove to itself that an inherently existent I is real, and that nothing, that I am a solid, independent entity that cannot be affected by anything else and will always exist in the way I want to exist and is in control. And we go to extraordinary lengths to reinforce that notion of I. And I think, when I look, that is what lies behind the fear of impermanence. Yeah, because if I'm impermanence, then that means, that I'm dependent on other factors, which means I'm not in control, which means that I'm not an independent entity that causes all my own shot, that calls the shots, okay? That I, in reality, am not who I think I am. Yeah. And, getting used to that idea and everything it entails. Yeah. And I think that's why they often say when people really get into meditation on emptiness, we hear the story of the monk who grabs his donka, And so this is said to be not when you have a direct realization of emptiness, but an inferential one. And that's what we're doing through our whole life. We're grabbing our donka the whole time to try and say, I'm here, I exist. Nothing can destroy me, not even death, not even reality, and that this is really, the crux of the matter in many ways. Okay? So I started this talk off, I'm just kind of rambling here if you haven't noticed, talking about riots and racism and going to impermanence and going to grasping at true existence, and tying all those things together. Yeah, because we live in the world, we see these things happening. How can we see them through through Dharma eyes? Yeah. Well, looking at impermanence and emptiness are two ways, and how we reject them. That's two ways to see everything. The other way is seeing things through the eyes of bodhicitta. Yeah. So it's up to us. We're the ones who create our reality. And if we train our mind to see things in a more realistic view, we will have a very different experience of them. When I say we create our reality, I don't mean my mind dictates what reality is going to be. I don't mean that, because that's what the grasping at inherent existence and grasping at permanence thinks it can do, which it can't. When I say our mind creates our reality, is how we respond to the situations that we encounter. Our response creates our experience in the situation. Yeah. So we can look at this and say, what is it that, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Isn't that our saying? Yeah. So I don't know about the handbasket, but anyway, it's maybe a handbasket filled with potatoes. Yeah. But that's only if we let our ignorant mind create the narrative and interpret the events in a certain way. Yeah. But if you look at, and this is where I think His Holiness's life is so important, and the life of so many of our teachers who are refugees, is if we went through their experience of being refugees, with our present state of mind, would we even be alive now, or would we have died because of depression and despair? Because depression and despair, you give up on life. Or do you see things from the viewpoint of bodhicitta? And what is it that the Lojong teachings teach us? Yeah, how to transform adversity into the path. Do we practice that? Yeah. Or when we hear the teachings on that, do we just take some notes and say, that sounds fantastic, put the notebook up there, close the computer file, and never think about it, and never use it when Sunday morning riots is the first thing that you read about, after you finish your practices in which you're trying to generate wisdom and compassion? Okay, so do we bring the teachings into our life and meditate on them according to the situations we're in right now? Can we look at all the different players in this mess and see everybody as under the control of afflictions and karma? Yeah, can we look at this as a big drama, with the stage crew, the writer, the producer, the director, the characters, everybody being afflictions and karma? Can we see it that way? And then, having seen it that way, can we have compassion for all the merely designated sentient beings who want to be happy and don't want to suffer, but who are creating the causes for suffering, including ourselves? Can we have compassion for all of them? Yeah. Can we then look at the situation fearlessly, being unafraid of impermanence, being unafraid of emptiness? Can we look at the situation as, it's like, you want a Lamrim teaching? Yeah, here it is. Right here, Sometimes we think, okay, teaching is you go into a room and there's a teacher and you make 3 prostrations and you sit down and you chant something and then they say something and you take notes and then you dedicate and finish. That sometimes we think that's what a teaching is. Can we look at what's happening right now in America as a Lamrim teaching? It is a huge Lamrim teaching. And if we can't see it as a teaching, and if we can't practice the Dharma within it, where's our refuge in the 3 jewels? Yeah? So this is a time for us not to say, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, but to say, I am so fortunate to have met the Dharma and to have heard the methods that talk about reality. And now I have a chance to put those methods into practice and see this situation more realistically, more beneficially, and then do what I can to act with compassion for everybody and not fall into despair that I can't change the whole world by tomorrow morning. Because this is one of our problems, isn't it? When we see the suffering, we want to change it ASAP. And we think that somehow we should, as an individual, be able to, poof, make everything better. Isn't that a bit unrealistic? Isn't that a bit egotistical? Yeah. We have to do what we're capable of doing and contribute and inspire other people to contribute. Yeah. And go forward with a happy mind. But changing other people, we can influence them. We can't make them change. Yeah. The one we can change is this one. And so that's the one we have to get to work on. Yeah. So, what do they say? Onward, Buddhist monastics. Or onward, Buddhist practitioners. Yeah. Okay, got it? Yeah. So, yeah, because that's the only choice, isn't it? That's the only choice. There's no other choice. Just one little thing about the absence of national leadership right now. I think what this is also saying to us is we need to be leaders in our own fields of influence. We can't wait for somebody else to show leadership. If there's going to be somebody talking about calm and compassion and listening to each other and respecting each other and equality for everybody, if anybody's going to be talking about, this country being founded on the idea of diversity and equality and how so many people from different countries and races and religions and so on have built this country, and that's our unifying factor, and that's what should make us, quote, quote, patriotic, some kind of ideal of equality and diversity. You know, if somebody's going to talk about that to bring people together, we've got to be that people who do it, because the other people aren't. And okay, we don't have the national platform. Yeah. And I don't think any of us want to become Twitter addicts. But, you know, within our sphere of influence, we have to talk about those kind of values and principles and not just complain that nobody is doing it.